Hilton brings you new ways to stay, with experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
You know that feeling when someone shows up for you just when you need it most? That's what Uber is all about. Not just a ride or dinner at your door. It's how Uber helps you show up for the moments that matter. Because showing up can turn a tough day around or make a good one even better. Whatever it is, big or small, Uber is on the way. So you can be on yours. Uber, on our way.
At Capella University, you can learn at your own pace with our FlexPath learning format. Take 1 or 2 courses at a time and complete as many as you can in a 12-week billing session. With FlexPath, you can even finish the bachelor's degree you started in 22 months for $20,000. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu. Fastest 25% of students. Cost varies by pace, transfer credits, and other factors. Fees apply.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. I mean, Kieran, before we say hello properly, just a little insight into our world, and perhaps why we're not quite as professional as some of the other podcasts out there, and that we had to delay the start slightly because Finley came wandering in looking for his usual patch of sunlight to lie down in and made quite some noise about it.
He's enjoying himself now. He's very curled up, and he does like to soak in the rays, which is something which you're not quite in alignment with. I think it's fair to say.
No, I get on well with Finley, but Finley and I have there's no meeting of minds on that, and some people would say there's no meeting of minds between me and a setter anyway. I would probably be outthought by a set, but you just you do that pod with the overlap for all those grown-up people. I can't imagine that's ever been delayed for 10 minutes while Paul Scholes' pit bull has to be found a biscuit or somewhere to sit and lay down. How are you, Kieran? Nice result of Wolves yesterday.
It was, yes, it was good day out. Had fun times. The only issue was I was driving home from the match, and I had a bump with a deer, and I know it's we chuckled about it before, but having to go and hit the brakes, and then he did bump into the front of the car, and I'm going, I have a big animal fan, but so I stopped the car parked, and he sort of looked at me as if to say, "What do you think you're doing?" And then trotted off. But that was a bit of a shock to the system. But the car's okay, and fortunately, and most importantly, the deer's okay. Cars can be fixed. Yeah, can't if you do damage to it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we had a chuckle about it, Kieran. You told me about it before we started recording. I said roe deer, and you thought I was being sympathetic. I was actually saying roe deer, not oh dear. But I'm glad the deer's fine, Kieran. But it's just. This time next year, the ducklings ain't coming to live at your house, are they? If the teacher listens to this pod, boy, that bandy bashing maniac, you ain't getting hold of our ducklings this year. Still your ducklings are causing some degree of consternation and laughter in South London, part of the world that knows little about ducklings. I have to say, I'm just hoping everybody's got over it by the time we get to Wembley next week. I don't want my day out spoiled by people. Random strangers go, you still got them ducklings, is he? It's questions day, Kieran, and we've got some old favourite themes here today, Kieran. Well, I think one day we might have to do a whole pod and just tick off all the things that club chairman can't do to get around FFP. It might just be easier than answering it on a weekly basis, basically. Our first question, though, comes from David Gethings. I think David might be American, the way he uses the word jersey rather than shirt, but the way things are going these days, I noticed the BBC the other day are now giving up saying a new series. They say new season. So that's just
slippery slope.
Isn't it just? But David Gethings has this question. You've mentioned previously that clubs make between 10 and 20% on jersey sales, depending on the agreement with the manufacturer and the retailer. Seeing a report recently that the Spurs club shop at the stadium sells around 1,000 Son jerseys at every home game made me wonder, what percentage do Spurs make from a direct jersey sale at the club shop, where the retailer and some additional costs would be removed? Or do Spurs and other Premier League clubs outsource the management of the club shop? Now, we had a similar situation, Kieran, when we were asked about, you spoke about Celtic and Rangers taking different degrees of profit, because Celtic manage their kit sales completely and Rangers outsource theirs. So this is an interesting one as to whether it's the club running the club shop or another company.
Yes, and I think this is an important issue going forwards, because it does have potential squad cost control implications. But the way that a deal is normally agreed between the kit manufacturer and the club is that, as David said, you will get a commission, effectively an intellectual property commission. You are selling the badge to as far as the manufacturer is concerned. And that varies depending upon how big the flat fee is. So when Liverpool moved from New Balance to Nike, they went from, I think, 25% to 7%, or the other way around, but they had a lower flat fee. In the case of Spurs, my understanding is that Spurs manage the club shop in-house, which is a very Daniel Levy thing to do, because he does like to have forensic control over as much as he can. And therefore, as well as the normal commission, because Nike are not responsible for paying rent, for paying wages, for paying other overheads, all of those costs are being borne by Spurs themselves. Spurs would get the normal commission that a retailer gets. And my understanding is that that's probably in the region of 40 to 45% of the sale price of the shirt. So on a shirt which is going for £80, 40% of that is what, 32, plus your general commission. So you're picking up, half of the value of the shirt on each occasion. Then for the names and the numbering, the player does get an element of that. Again, that will be part of the contract signed between the player and the club in terms of intellectual property rights, but both parties can benefit from that. So, it's, if they're selling 1,000 Son jerseys and they're on £100, because if they're Son jerseys, then you will have bought into the number and the name and so on. Spurs are probably making somewhere in the region of 45 to 50 pounds per shirt. That's £50,000 a match. So that's pretty good going.
That's not a bad way. Incidentally, if any of our listeners can help me here, so I'm for another project, Kieran, I'm doing a bit of research around the history of club shops. And the history of football, as you know, is difficult to pin down, because most people didn't think those football clubs were going to last more than 3 or 4 months, a bit like us and the pod.
Yes.
So very few people wrote stuff down for the prosperity. And if you think trying to find the history of a football club is difficult, trying to find a history of club shops is almost impossible. So I vaguely remember a hole in the wall at the back of the main stand in Sellers Park. But that, I think, was mainly selling match day programmes from away games, and was frequented by the sort of middle-aged bloke your mum told you to keep away from. So if anybody out there has got any memory of early club shops or can point me in the direction, I'd be most pleased. Certainly, I think even 20 years ago, the idea of a mega store would be incredible. The idea that a club 20 years ago could be making 50 grand from selling 1,000 shirts with one player's name on the back would be baffling, wouldn't it, to football clubs?
Incredible, yeah.
I mean, you gave me some figures about Man United's commercial income in 1974, which you literally do a Yogi Bear eyes popping out type thing.
I was staggered. And also allowed me to go into the archives of Companies House. So if anybody wants to make me happy on a boring day, just ping me a message, and I'm quite happily go into that rabbit hole and come back a few hours later.
Man United got £2,000 in 1974 for their TV deal.
Yeah, I
Their
know.
TV, 2,000 quid for their TV deal. They're hilarious. Even when you go, well, actually, that would probably be 4 million quid these days, and you look it up, and it's only 8.5. It's only 160 grand if you today's equivalent. It's incredible. Tom Thorpe has our next question, and again, it makes me wonder, Kieran, about the almost criminal mindset of some of our listeners. I have to say, I'm sure Tom Thorpe is a lovely man, but he's. I think we've got a prototype Uncle Terry on our hands here with Tom. Tom says, now that so many transfer fees include incentives, could this cause corruption when the teams are in the same league? For example, if Palace or Brighton were playing Man City towards the end of the season, which one of us is, and has very little to play for, which one of us isn't, but was due to receive another £5 million for a player if Man City win the league, could this cause a club to purposely lose a game? I understand it's unlikely to happen in the Premier League, but in the lower leagues, where some clubs are in bad financial situations, I feel it could. Now, I'm slightly uneasy. There's part of me that says that in English football, the idea of a club purposely losing a game or not trying is impossible, but I'm not sure whether that's true. But, I mean, it's a very good question. I mean, for example, Wolves-Brighton yesterday, when... I suppose you'd argue that 2 places up the league is 6 million quid, which then cancels out that another £5 million. But it's a really good angle on the bonuses clauses question, isn't it?
It is. And looking at the accounts of Manchester City, they have total add-on fees for transfers should they achieve certain goals, conditions, of £291 million. So there's going to be some clubs who will be wanting Manchester City to do X or Y or Z, not Z, because it would be significantly beneficial. If we take a look at the remaining fixtures, Brighton's last home game of this season is against Liverpool. Well, let's say that instead of Liverpool having already thoroughly and deservedly won the Premier League, if they had to win it, and remember Brighton sold McAllister to Liverpool, it could be that Brighton have a big sell-on fee or a big add-on fee for McAllister being a contributor to Liverpool winning the Premier League. And that could be... And I absolutely agree with you. With £3 million a place, everything is worth playing for. But, for a club that had perhaps already been relegated, or for a club that was already in the in the playoffs or had secured their place in Europe, these incentives could be less. From the football players that I've met and you've met and so on, they just want to win, and they are independently wealthy enough to not be swayed by these things, as are club executives, because they know that if this got out, remember, I think if we go back to the 1970s, was it Peter Storey was involved in wasn't throwing a match or gambling on, and we're old enough to remember these very old stories, and Babe Ruth and all of these things that we expect our sports heroes to act on a different plane to industrialists, to business people, to politicians who, politicians offering contracts to donors, this type of thing is, we just cynically shrug it aside. But we do hold football players and football clubs to a higher standing than I think other organisations. So it could be done. I understand where Tom is coming from for saying it's unlikely in the Premier League, but in the lower leagues. But my only concern there, Tom, is because transfer fees in the lower leagues tend to be so much lower, it would have to be a very big add-on for that to be the case. But again, looking at what's the most valuable match of the year, it's the match that gets you from the Championship into the Premier League. And given that there are no financial incentives in the Championship, and we're doing this conceptually, there is no evidence, and I can assure you, I have absolutely no belief that this would ever happen. If you're 14th in the Championship and you've sold a player and you get a £3 million bonus from the opponents if they get promoted, £3 million in the Championship's a decent amount. Yeah, it's 10% of your total revenue. So you could see that. Talking of FA Cup finals, and I know you're less than a week to go, so exciting. I know somebody connected with an FA Cup final who went into management, and he was managing a club where the chairman did come into the dressing room and said, "Okay, lads, don't bust a gut in this match. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink." And they duly didn't, and that match was lost, and nothing was ever said. Although the players, I think the players ended up going to Vegas at the end of the season. Yeah, so these things do occur. It didn't occur in this country, by the way.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you who it was after the show. Or, of course, if you're a Price of Football Club member. No, won't. But these things do take place. There's no evidence that it takes place domestically.
Certain things to unpick from that. First of all, Hark at You sounded like a Sky Sports commentator saying it's the most important game of the year, the Championship playoff final. This is the only. Everything else pales into it. As you said about modern play, I can understand a manager last day of the season, 12th playing 13th. I can understand a manager saying, "Look, lads, don't get hurt."
Yeah,
we'll play them. And even then, they might go from 100% to 99%.
Yeah,
I can't imagine any modern player being very impressed if the club owner or the club manager were to say, "Look, we could get £4 million for our left back's buy-on clause if we lose this game." I just don't think that's how it works. Jesper Eck as our next question. Jesper says, and again, suddenly out of nowhere, Kieran, that this subject has become a really important one, to the extent that producer Guy, I believe, found this question in the queue, and because it relates to something we spoke about recently, has bumped it up. So Jesper X says, selling an academy product is viewed as pure profit. I get that, but if the maximum period for amortization of a player is 5 years, how does selling a player who's been at the club for 6 years after being bought differ from selling an academy product?
Yeah, very, very fair comment. This is not criticism of Jesper at all. I absolutely understand where he's coming from. Isn't it a shame that we refer to academy players as products?
Yes, it is, but we do, unfortunately.
Yeah, we do, and we've said before they are commodities.
Yeah,
I've had a meeting with an academy manager who says I have a budget and I am seen as a profit centre at the club, not as a developer of young talent. That is modern football. If a player signs a 5-year contract, in order for that player to be there 6 years, he would have had to have signed an extension to the contract. So what happens is that when there is an extension, you take the value of the player at that date and you say, we're now going to effectively treat this as a new signing. So, and then amortize again. So if we take, for example, the case of Eden Hazard, who is still the best player I've ever seen at the Amex, in terms of Chelsea played us it was a Saturday lunchtime game, and I've never seen anybody put so little effort into being brilliant. And that was it. He just glided. It was an incredible performance, and they absolutely mullered us. But when he joined Chelsea in 2012 for £32 million, he signed a 5-year contract, which meant that the amortization was £6.4 million a year. But 3 years later, and he had been brilliant, he signed a new 5-year contract. So what you do is you say, right, he joined us for £32 million. He's been with us for 3 years, so that's 3 years worth of amortization. That's what, 19.2 million. So he had a book value of 12. So we now say we're effectively signing Eden Hazard again, but this time for £12 million, and we're going to amortize him over that new 5 years. So there will be a little bit of value left in the player. But going back to Jesper's comment, if he's been there for 6 years, that little bit of value is very little. So it's not 100% profit that the club makes, but it's still a huge amount of profit. And when Hazard went to Real Madrid for £100 million, Chelsea probably made about 98 million in profit on that. And then, even though and this is the crazy thing, he retired, I think was it last October, and Real Madrid are still having to pay bonuses for their achievements since he's retired, because that was the contract. Chelsea had a really good set of lawyers when they agreed that particular deal.
If you've shopped online, chances are you've bought from a business powered by Shopify. You know that purple Shop Pay button you see at checkout? The one that makes buying so incredibly easy? That's Shopify. And there's a reason so many businesses sell with it, because Shopify makes it incredibly easy to start and run your business. Shopify is the commerce platform behind 10% of all e-commerce in the US. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/promo. Go to shopify.com/promo.
This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest, with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/Spotify.
Just on an existential level, Kieran, you're academy manager that you spoke to, and I wouldn't dream of asking you to name him, even to me, after the pod, to be perfectly honest. But it's such a shame that we've reached a state in English football where clubs are looking to raise these players as a way of getting around P&S rules. Essentially, yes. That's what they're identifying. They're identifying future ways of getting around P&S rules. They're not identifying, as Palace used to do 30 years ago, young players to go into the team, or young players that might be sold at a profit. Crew Alexander, their model was to many clubs in the lower leagues. That's a model. You can understand that. That's a perfectly valid financial model. Identify young talent, move them on at a profit at a young age. Fine, but to identify players simply to raise them to get round profit and sustainability rules, which is happening, and we know it. We've heard it. We've heard it. We've heard people tell us that. It's slightly dispiriting, is it not?
Yes, and again, going back to the conversation I had, I said, well, how do you feel it from a perspective of pastoral care? Because myself as an educator, that's the one thing. Universities are very laid back place to work, but I'm incredibly conscious that I have responsibility towards developing the skills of these young people, and to me that's the most important thing. And he says, I do have it, but I've got somebody over my shoulder who's looking at me through the lens of a spreadsheet. Yeah, and that is dispiriting.
But you prove it's possible to do both, Kieran. You can be pastoral spreadsheet man, can't you? It's possible.
I guess so.
But you do have, academy coaches are educators, and educators, just in the way they behave around those young people, have got a duty to show those young people how to behave. These are kids, boys and girls at a very impressionable age, who need to see people around them. It's just, and of course, I don't know any. I know a lot of academy coaches, Kieran, and they are all amazing people who are doing the job for the right reasons. I imagine it's just as frustrating for them as it is for your chap that you talk to. Anyway, talking of profit and sustainability, and indeed talking of club shops, I almost think we need a little sting, a little sound effect to introduce some kind of swan. I might get Ed to do some kind of swanny whistle thing. Here's this week's way of getting around P&S rules. It comes from Luke Zubina. Thank you for this, Luke. I always look forward to these, Kieran, actually. Luke Zubina says, in order to circumvent profit and sustainability rules, could a football club owner decide to just purchase everything in the club shop using their own personal wealth? I don't know what Steve Parish would do with a 1,000 Palace garden gnomes, Kieran? I don't know. I'm sure his garden is big enough to accommodate all those garden gnomes. But then, so Luke says the club would then get a nice increase in revenue, and the owner is investing in the club. Well, I'm sure the fans would rather he was buying players than buying garden gnomes, but there you are. With this in mind, could the club shop just decide to sell a range of cheap products for a huge markup, say £1 million, knowing then that the club owner will purchase those products and the revenue will count towards profit and sustainability? I don't like to sound cynical, Kieran, or Luke as well, but pretty much the whole role of a club shop is to sell a range of cheap products for a huge markup.
Yes.
That's pretty much that's their one job, essentially.
Yeah, hey Siri, give me an example of the word tat.
Which division do you want me to start in? I was delighted to learn the other day that you can buy AFC Wimbledon dog poo bag dispensers, and indeed Tottenham dog pajamas and an official Crystal Palace tape measure for that Palace supporting plumber in your life.
Yes, as far as this is concerned, Luke, I have had this discussion with fans before. If a football club has a transaction with an owner, and that transaction is deemed to be, and the word is material. So the word material means significant. And that can be the significant to the club in terms of how it moves the dial, or significant as far as the owner's wealth is concerned. Remember, many owners are worth far more than clubs. So you look at it through the lens of both parties to the transaction. So if it is a material transaction, and I think the Premier League, when it's got its knickers in a twist following the Newcastle United takeover, it rushed through new legislation which said that every transaction worth more than £1 million has to be approved by the Premier League. Then it would have to be disclosed in the club accounts, and the total. So you couldn't say, oh, well, in which case, we're going to buy a load of garden gnomes for £999,999. So you look at the total value of all of those transactions, and you then have to state whether or not they have been sold at fair market value, and if not, then there would be a review by the Premier League or the EFL version of the Stasi. They come in and they go through your books, and the chances are that they would say that those transactions are not at market price, and therefore we would exclude them. If we take a look at what's happened at Chelsea in their 2023 accounts, when they sold the hotel for themselves at a very, very high markup, to be fair to the Premier League, they did come in and say, you're taking the mickey a bit there. And they had to knock £6 million off that price. It will be interesting to see what happens with Chelsea and the sale of the women's team, because that £200 million transaction, and Chelsea don't need to sell. And the cynic in me, and I'm not a cynical person, as we both know, the cynic in me, Chelsea have pitched at the price at such a ridiculous level that if the Premier League come back and say, actually, no, it's only worth 160, which is still a price difficult to justify. You go in with a crazy price. The Premier League says, well, look, we knocked off £40 million. We're the good guys in this. And Chelsea is still sniggering away by saying, well, we've done very well there.
Yeah, I was getting worried about you, Kieran. We were 28 minutes in and you hadn't mentioned Chelsea. So I was about to send you a little WhatsApp message. John Hedges has our next question, Kieran, and I'm really interested in the answer to this, because I know this is something that Steve Parrish has been talking about for quite some time. John Hedges says, my question is regarding reserve team football and whether regional reserve team leagues might be viable. Attendances at matches in the old football combination and other reserve team leagues like the Central League were reported to have been in the thousands on occasions. I've heard it said there are concerns that it's becoming increasingly difficult to prepare academy players for league football, and bearing those things in mind, could there be a financial case made for bringing back regional reserve team leagues? Any such league could be based in relatively small geographical areas to keep costs down. And as these games would be outside the Football League or Premier League, could they be played on Saturday at 3 p.m. and maybe broadcast online, as the usual 3 p.m. blackout wouldn't apply? Now, Steve Parrish, as I indicate, would be interested in the answer to this question as well, because he's argued for a long time, or he's certainly used to, that reserve team football needs to come back, because it's very difficult to prepare academy players for the rigours of life in the Championship or the Premier League without reserve team players, which is why so many academy players at every club find themselves out on loan at League One, League Two clubs for 2 or 3 seasons before they're even considered for the first team by Premier League managers. And John's absolutely right. You would go to reserve team, especially if one of the big players had been out injured for some time and was coming back to play in the reserve game. You'd get a couple of thousand people there.
I think you might have done some time ago, and the reason why I'm being slightly circumspect here is that I did used to go and watch reserve team football in the 1970s and 1980s. Part of the reason why, because there was no live football on television. Now, if you were going to say, do you want to go and schlep out to the training grounds to watch a match when there's a Champions League match on, or there's the playoffs that we've seen this week in the EFL have been fantastic, and we've got the National League playoffs. We've already got a very cluttered football calendar. We do have Premier League 2, where players are getting experience. And we also have, it should be remembered, the EFL Trophy, because there's now 15 under-21 teams that go into this competition. And it is on a group basis, so they do get 3 matches. And these teams are playing against the first teams of EFL clubs. So Premier League under-21s. What I think is intriguing is that we often say, God, these kids, they're absolutely amazing. Of those 15 under-21 teams, 14 got knocked out at the group stage.
Okay, right.
Because there is a difference between a bunch of 18-year-olds who are very technically talented and players who have picked up the dark arts and also have picked up experience and so on. And there's an element of... So I've spoken to some players about this. I say, how do you prepare? They say, well, okay, it's not the same as elite. But if you think we're going to allow ourselves to be given a runaround by a bunch of 18-year-olds, think about it from I'm a professional footballer. Think, in terms of my professional pride, there's no way. So actually, these players do get a fair amount of experience from that. We also have, and I think we discussed this with Mark Ives when he came on the show in last autumn. We now have the National League Cup, which is a similar competition.
That's true, yeah. Okay.
So there is Premier League 2, there is EFL Trophy, there is National League Cup. And you're absolutely right that if you've got a player coming back from injury, what do you do? Well, what you do is that you arrange a match behind closed doors. And you then read that these matches have taken place because you don't actually want the fans there. You don't want that additional pressure, and these things can be organised at short notice. The other big difference, going back to the days of the Central League and the football combination and so on, is that you and I grew up in an era where your Saturday squad was the 11 starting players and 1 substitute.
Yeah.
So there was 12.
True, yeah.
Whereas now we're looking at 19, 20 players. You add on the fact that most clubs have probably got 4 or 5 players injured. There's not actually a lot of spare players to go round to fill that particular gap. So I absolutely understand where John is coming from. And I have memories of abusing players at reserve matches, one of whom then came across and, should we say, had a word because I realised I'm not normal because that one voice, that one squeaky voice does carry, and I realised, actually, you're a professional athlete and I'm a scrawny 19-year-old who thinks he's a bit of a smart-ass. I think there's only one winner in these particular circumstances.
Well, because you're so tall as well, you stand out. You can't get away with it. I do remember Damien Delaney. There was one particular Palace-Chelsea game where everyone commented on the the brilliant battle between Damien Delaney, our centre back, and Diego Costa. And Damien Delaney say after I've played in League Two. I've played against much harder people than Diego Costa. So,
wow.
Now, this next question. Sorry, John, I thought that was a really good I actually got quite excited by John Hedges' question there, Kieran, but you're absolutely quite right. This is why I host the thing, and you're basically there as a Lancaster bomber tail gunner to shoot to shoot these in. This next question comes from Owen, Kieran, and it mentions parachute payments, which reminds me that several people have asked me to ask you this question, because obviously I didn't know the answer to it. We've seen the unusual situation. I know it happened to Sunderland back in 2017, I think, but we've seen the situation where Luton Town have been relegated twice, so have now gone from the Premier League to League One. So what do they continue to get their parachute payments from the Premier League, and is that now added to the parachute payment they will get from League One?
They will certainly get the parachute payment of £34 million that the Premier League is due to pay them, because the Premier League simply pays it to clubs who are relegated. What subsequently happens to those clubs, unless they return to the Premier League, is none of the Premier League's business. In terms of the parachute payments they get from the EFL, I think they will get that as well, because it does simply state that in your first year of relegation, and the parachute payments are a lot lower on a proportionate basis. But yes, I think they could get two sets in next season. How much of that will go into the squad and how much of that will go into the new stadium, we don't know. And I think Luton fans are a bit grumpy.
Well, you can't blame them. And the parachute payment money is no consolation, but it's one of those things where people go, hang on a second, will they lose one? Because that seems particularly unfair if that's the case. But I suppose when it starts to get complicated is when they get promoted. But no, they wouldn't be able to get promoted back. That would be outside the 3-year parachute payment from the Premier League. Yes, go on. Well done, tail gunner. You've done it again. Owen has our next question. Producer guys obviously have got my strict rules on one name only questions, but it's a decent question, so I'm going to ask it anyway. Owen says, on a recent episode, Kieran mentioned how certain Premier League clubs would like a reduced 16-team Premier League to free up slots for lucrative friendlies. He also mentioned how the teams in the Championship who receive parachute payments are at an obvious great advantage financially. Is a scenario therefore remotely possible or legal where the bigger clubs in the Championship could split off and form a Premier League B with the lower teams in the current Premiership? It could mean splitting the revenue between the top 16 teams and a second 16 who had received maybe 65% of the top level. Now, again, I'm very interested in the answer to this, because you will remember, Kieran, because you don't drink, that back in the early days of the pod, I predicted that it would be a Premier League B, that inevitably the finances of football were such that there would have to be a Premier League B in the next 2 decades or so to accommodate all those clubs who keep getting shifted up from the Premier League to the Championship. So I'll be interested in your answer to this.
Well, if we take a look at the proposals of Project Big Picture, that did involve a reduction in the size of the Premier League. I think it was to 18. So that those conversations have taken place. Has there been suggestions of a 16 plus 16 and then 4 lower divisions? There have been WhatsApp messages exchanged, I can assure you of that. The problem is getting it over the line. Because would Steve Parish vote for it? Because Crystal Palace, as part of a top 20, you've proven yourself for over a decade. Brighton have been there for 8 years. So being part of a top 20 and all of the benefits that brings are for the middle classes of the Premier League are very lucrative. If you take away 4 home fixtures from Crystal Palace, from West Ham United, from Brighton Hove Albion, from Bournemouth, so on, that's a significant hit to their revenue, which they're not going to replace. Whereas the clubs at the top of the Premier League, the ones who, Manchester United are flying out to Hong Kong 48 hours after the end of the season, wherever it's going to be, and they're picking up £8 million for playing one match or something great. So this is one of the issues, which was I don't know whether people watch Parliament TV, but David Cogan, the approved regulator chair, he raised this, and this is something we've covered as well historically. He says, we talk about the Premier League as if it's a single organisation. It's not. There are factions, and we know the Big Six have got a different attitude towards football. So, would there be enthusiasm for this decision or this idea from Owen? Yes, there would be. Would there be enthusiasm from 14 teams to vote for it? Where they're going, hold it, 14 out of 6, even if you were 2 up, 2 down, and then the third relegation place, and again, this was part of Project Big Picture, effectively went between a playoff between the side finishing third bottom of the Premier League and sides finishing third, fourth, and fifth in Premier League 2, or whatever it's going to be. Yes, there would be slightly lower risk of relegation, but there would still be a much higher risk of relegation. So the mid-table clubs would get less money, one would assume. The rich clubs would get more. It would be more beneficial for clubs in Premier League 2. There also has been talk amongst some clubs at Championship level from forming their own breakaway competition. So people forget that the Premier League is a breakaway competition, and there are club owners in the Championship who do not like sharing money with clubs from League 1 and League 2. And their view is, let's go and set up our own TV deal, because at present the split is 80% to the Championship, 12% to League 1 and 8% to League 2. Let's do our own TV deal. We keep 100%, and then Leagues 1 and 2 can go and sort out their own TV deal. Yeah, and it all becomes self-interest, short-term decision-making, which is being replicated again and again. So if when we're recording episode 3000 of The Price of Football in 2034, do I expect to see the current formation of the 92 clubs? The answer is not necessarily. What we will see, we don't know.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
I'm not sure Matron will allow us to be still recording this in that time. We'll have to wake us up in front of the telly. There's a certain irony, isn't there, that there are Championship club owners who don't want to share their money with League 1 and 2, but are still very keen on the Premier League sharing the money with them, basically. And I think the first couple of years of the playoffs, Kieran, the team that did finish third bottom of the Premier League was involved, wasn't it, with the team? I remember, I think Charlton and Leeds playing each other at Sellers Park. Alex O'Neill has our last question, Kieran, and as you've been a very good boy, Guy and I said, we need a nice accounting question for Kieran. He's been so good. He's a bit shaky after looking after ducklings for so many times and being eyeballed by a deer. So Alex O'Neill has this question for you, Kieran. And Alex O'Neill, it's a proper accounting question. Alex O'Neill says, what capacity could the Premier League have for making football clubs have a March year end for the purposes of submitting accounts? This would then remove the issue of timing during the summer transfer window around the June year end, and would also allow time for submission and review of accounts well before the end of the calendar year, meaning any appeals could be resolved before the January transfer window to remove any uncertainty around how the season would play out. Now, I have to say, Kieran, this is one of those issues, the year-end accounting purposes, that talking to other football fans, it confuses them as much as me, because it does seem to be a movable feast, does it not? The whole idea of year-end accounting, and the whole idea that not every club has to submit their accounts at the same time, which to me seems a bit counterintuitive. So I'm interested in the answer to all the questions, Kieran. Not to the extent that I remember them on a weekly basis, but still.
If you take a look at the Premier League rulebook, and also if you take a look at the EFL rulebook, it says that your accounting reference date has to be somewhere between the 31st of May and the 31st of July. The rationale behind this is that we assess football clubs operationally on a season-by-season basis. So therefore, having a financial set of numbers on a similar basis makes sense. Having said that, UEFA, under their new squad cost controls, are using a calendar basis for exactly the same reason that Alex has just mentioned. It allows them to do a quick assessment and to implement sanctions that much quicker. In terms of bringing it forward to the end of March, the Premier League, again, and the Premier League deserves credit for this, says that although you don't have to send your accounts to Companies House until 9 months after your year end, you've got to send them to us at the Premier League by the 31st of December, and we will check them over, and we will send the boys round if we think something is untoward within a fortnight. So there still is scope to have in-season sanctions, unless it's a complicated transaction such as Chelsea selling the women's team to itself. And here, people are saying to us, why has this gone quiet? We're nearly at the end of the season. Should Chelsea have been sanctioned by the Premier League? The problem is it's complicated. And if it's complicated, it means that that buys time. So it is something which has both merits and demerits. The only club that has a May, June or July year end is Mansfield Town, and that's because Mansfield Town are actually owned by an insurance company which has got a 31st December year end, and to tie in with the parent company, Mansfield Town have a 31st December year, which really mucks up my spreadsheet. You should see my bottom lip when that comes out. But I mean, to be fair to the other clubs, they are pretty good. With one or two exceptions, such as Crawley Town, who are delaying publication of their accounts for 3 months. Why are you doing that, boys? Why are the crypto bros doing that? I just wonder.
Is that announced? Do they announce that they're delaying publication, or are they simply not publish on the date they're supposed to be?
What they've done is that there is a loophole under corporate legislation which allows you to delay for 3 months, and it makes sense if you're a retailer. It makes no sense whatsoever if you're a football club. But the rules were designed to be all-encompassing, and then there's no carve-out for football.
Right. Could that indicate that they're perhaps trying to sell the club, or could it be a perfectly...
I hear there is interest, but... Yeah, I was told the price they were looking for is bonkers.
Okay.
But bonkers and football club prices go hand in hand.
Of course. Well, especially this time of year, Kieran, when the playoffs yes. The playoffs are happening. The Americans have seen Wrexham promoted again. They're all sniffing around. I mean, there's a lot of clubs that haven't got in the playoffs, probably desperately putting themselves in local newspapers in the United States up for sale. I'm glad you clarified that. The idea that Premier League clubs have to submit accounts to the Premier League by the 31st of December, because that all makes it a bit more sensible to me now.
Yes,
I have to say, because I never could quite get my head around the various accounts dribbling, and of course it makes perfect sense. It would have to be between May and July, because that's when the season's over. Thanks to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page, and everyone who has now joined the brand new Price of Football Club. If you'd like to join the club too, you'll get ad-free listening. You'll get bonus episodes. You'll get an invite to our monthly Q&A session, which is happening on Tuesday night.
It is. Assuming I've got to go up to Manchester and back in the day because I'm recording the overlap with Paul Scholes and Gary Neville, but I should be back in time for that.
Yeah, well, let's not tell our club members that the Gary Neville podcast takes preference over their £3 a month, Kieran. We're looking forward to it anyway. It will happen.
Absolutely.
It will happen. Don't worry.
Yes,
and you'll get access to all those things by going to our website, which is priceoffootball.com. If you have a question you'd like answered on our weekly Tuesday question show, then email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter X and you can find us on YouTube. And if you'd like to buy one of our excellent books and the Price of Football t-shirt is back, you can find all the details on that very same website, priceoffootball.com. We'll be back on Thursday when I may well be too nervous to speak, to be perfectly honest. And in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thank you to everybody for writing in the questions because it takes time and effort. I must confess, when producer Guy originally suggested this to myself and Kevin, we just looked at each other. Who's going to bother? And we, as always, this is why he's in charge of the business and we're in charge of the wittertainment. There's a variety of ways in which you can support the show. And as well as being a Price of Football Club member, you could alternatively, for free, just again, do a little bit of writing, give us a review, go on to your podcast app, and it helps us with algorithms, it helps us in the charts, it's a competitive market, which we're all in favour of. It doesn't matter what you say. So you could even say, you'd rather have the show presented by the miserable Ruben Dias after Manchester City's 0-0 draw. My word, he was a grumpy chap. And Father Jack from Father Ted. Because I think those two would make it a less than happy show, but entertaining all the same.
The brilliant thing about Father Jack is that the actor who played him, whose name I'm afraid escapes me, was just the most amazing, erudite, proper old-fashioned stage actor who sounded nothing like Father Jack whatsoever, but would quite happily just say, "Do it to me, Father Jack, would you?" And he would happily tell you to. So I'd love to. I'd love to see Father Jack just do it on his own.
Yes.
Actually,
yes, that would be brilliant. Amortization with Father Jack, that'd be brilliant.
I might have a word with Ardle. We just get the surviving members back. I just think who'd write it though, because one of them. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The Price of Football. The Price of Football.